It's the year 2000. No, it's not the new millennium yet. This is the year when John Travolta wore ugly dreadlocks in Battlefield Earth, MTV Cribs rudely invaded celebrity homes, and the Baha Men bravely asked, "Who let the dogs out?" But we're not here to get back Gruffy, mash Gruffy, you flea-infested mongrel, because today we're counting down Electronic Gaming Monthly's worst reviewed games of 2000. Ho, 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 ho! If you've been watching EGM's best reviewed list, then you already know that sports games are having a bit of a moment. It started with a game here and there breaking onto the list, but it's safe to say that the floodgates broke, and in 2000 there were 2 sports simulators that managed to crack the top 10. 3 if you count Gran Turismo 2. But if sports games are starting to dominate the best reviewed charts, then I guess it only seems fair that a few bad ones show up on the worst lists. And that brings us to Sammy Sosa Softball, a sports game that left the editors thoroughly confused. Craig sums it up perfectly. This game is one of those bad ideas that ranks alongside his and her toilets. Except those bad ideas have an excuse for stinking. Dan Leahy complained that everything about this game is subpar. The graphics harken back to the first generation PlayStation days. Player models are terrible, but hey, it doesn't stop there. They threw in really sucky animation and horrid, laggy camera angles to boot. The fact that the awful throwing and catching is more of a side note to the rest of the problems is telling. With all these issues, Sammy Sosa Softball averages a steroid-filled 1.8 out of 10. Speaking of bad sports simulators, here comes PGA European Tour on the Nintendo 64. Not to be confused with Electronic Arts' popular and well-liked PGA Tour series, this Infogrames clunker failed to even get the basics right. It looked bad, was hard to play, and had crummy audio. Or, as Dan so elegantly puts it, like John Daly after a 3-day bender, this game misses the cut by a long shot. Dean isn't sure what to make of the presentation. There's something strange about the graphics in this game. Yeah, they're ugly, but ugly in a way I've never seen before. During any kind of movement, the golfers and greens seem to modulate at a frequency. Or it looks like you're seeing everything through heat vapors. And guys, don't forget that he's the critic that gave the game the highest score. Joe gave it a 1 and noted that if Mario Golf is the Pebble Beach of Nintendo 64 golf titles, then European Tour is that strip of grass running between north and southbound lanes on the busy expressway. With all 3 editors hating it, this tour is marooned with an average of 1.8 out of 10. You can look at Grudge Warriors a couple of different ways. On one hand, it's a car combat game that was released after most people had moved on from the genre. But you can also look at it as an experiment. Released at a retail price of just $10, this budget game from Take-Two was a reaction to Sony dropping PlayStation licensing fees. That's an interesting footnote to history. But what an unorthodox business strategy is the most interesting thing you can say about a game, and it's easy to see why it shows up on a worst reviewed list. Like a lot of low-scoring games covered by EGM, Grudge Warriors only received a single review. Andrew noted the bargain bin discount, but concluded that the low price didn't make up for the numerous problems. Looking like a pre-first generation PlayStation game, Grudge Warriors is among the worst of any vehicular combat. Nay, any game of any genre I've had the misfortune of playing. Everything about the combat is uninspired, i.e. a ripoff. Especially when it comes to the weapons, which can randomly run out thanks to a bug. If they cleaned up the graphics and tightened up the controls, Grudge Warriors may have achieved mediocrity. Unfortunately, everything about this title screams apathy. EGM wasn't fooled by the $10 asking price and gave this long-forgotten turd a 1.5 out of 10. With the arcade era coming to a close and fighting games going through a bit of a transition, Mortal Kombat was at a crossroads in the year 2000. The same fighting franchise that dominated the market only a few years ago was struggling to stay relevant, something that certainly wasn't helped by the mixed reactions to Mortal Kombat 4. Midway would eventually reinvent this series with 2002's Deadly Alliance. But first, they needed to figure out what not to do with the insufferable spin-off Mortal Kombat Special Forces on PlayStation. What the hell happened here? Asks Mark, the only person to review this game. I swear, this game looked better over a year ago at E3. What happened to being able to play as Sonya and not just Jax? The graphics remind me of a 4+ year old first generation game like Loaded. Actually, scratch that, Loaded looked better. He also complained about the combat, which he called crap, and the basic combo moves. Punch, that's it. Punch and punch and punch some more. Just keep mindlessly tapping it. With an average of 1.5 out of 10, this probably should have been the final nail in Mortal Kombat's coffin. Yeah, thankfully the franchise proved to be a lot more resilient than anybody expected. Alright, so I've spent a lot of time talking about how Electronic Gaming Monthly started to give out significantly higher scores around the turn of the millennium. Well, the same is true on the other end of the scale. Before issue 135, EGM's lowest score was none other than Deadly Arts with an average of 1.75 out of 10. And before that, you have to go back a few years to find 1995's Blue Lightning CD, which scored an atrocious 2.25. In fact, 12 of the 15 worst reviewed games before 2000 were released in either 1998 or 1999, showing a willingness to use every inch of the grading scale. Now, when it comes to the Flintstones Bedrock Bowling, the problem was with the lie that's right in the title. Calling this a bowling game is incredibly misleading, starts Chris, the lone review. There's no traditional bowling, something that's not clear from the packaging. The only thing tying it to bowling is that you have to knock over single pins placed around the lane. Lanes are like tracks, turning the game into a sad knockoff of those Mario 64 levels where you slid on your butt collecting coins. He also complained that the graphics are very plain, there's a lot of pop-ups, and there aren't any cameos from the show. If we hadn't previewed the game 10 months ago, I would have guessed it had been crapped out in a month. With a score of 0.5, Bedrock Bowling isn't just the worst reviewed game of the year, but the lowest scoring game in Electronic Gaming Monthly's history. And it's not even close. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Electronic Gaming Monthly's Best and Worst. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we'll be back on Tuesday to recap Electronic Gaming Monthly's best reviewed games of 2001. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your least favorite game of 2000? Let me know in the comments below. So, did you notice how many reviews used first generation PlayStation as an insult? Sure, those early 32-bit games were a little rough, I guess, but they really hit that note over and over and over. I guess we'll see if that continues in 2001. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.